There are three different types of properties. The first one being hue. Hue refers to the primary or generic name of a color. So for instance, basic hues are red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet. However, within the world of colored pencils, even paint and crayons, you can have various hues that relate to one name of a color being red. So for instance, you can have vermilion red, alizarin crimson red, cadmium red medium, cadmium red light. You could have quinacridone red. These are all specific hues that all relate to a basic hue, but the specific hues for each color let us know the difference of the color's value and intensity. So value is the second property of color, and value refers to the relative lightness or darkness of a color. For your drawings, if you want your objects, and we do want our objects to be three-dimensional, you need to show a full range of values, being where you have the lightest lights and then the darkest darks, and that's what we're seeing in the picture on the right. We're going to be creating different values by layering different colors on top of one another to increase the value of each subsequent hue that we're mixing. One thing here, I've written that the value of a color is altered by adding white or black. Now this may be necessarily true, however, we're going to be experimenting with other ways of darkening a color that does not involve black. Now, as we're mixing different values, one of the terms we're going to refer to is tint. Tint is a value term that means you've added white to a color. When you have a tint, you're going to have a more pastel looking color because white tends to dilute and decrease a color's intensity. The term shade refers to a very dark value hue. Most often, artists create shades by adding black, but we're going to be once again experimenting with different ways to create a shade that does not always include black. Sometimes black can make our drawings look kind of flat, where if we use other darker colors to increase the value of a color or decrease the value to where it gets darker, then our drawings can become more vibrant and more alive. The final property of color is intensity. Intensity refers to how bright or pure or intense the color actually is. So whenever you're coloring with colored pencil, the color is going to be most intense when it's not mixed with any other color. Two ways, though, that you can reduce the intensity of a hue is you can mix that hue with a gray that is the same value of it. The value won't change, but the intensity will. Those of you that are working at home from cyber, you may not have a gray in the packets. If you're able to come to school, then I can provide you with different grays that you can use to reduce the intensity. A second way that you can reduce the intensity of a color if it's too bright and you need to kind of dilute that down is you can mix that color with its complement. So a complementary color is one that is opposite of the original color on the color wheel. When you combine a color with its complement, it reduces the intensity of both colors simultaneously. So opposite colors would be red and green, orange and blue, purple and yellow. Another thing that I want to mention, and this is separate from the three properties of color being hue, value, and intensity, is that there is a thing that's called color temperature, and that refers to the relative warmth or coolness of a color. A color can be perceived as being warm or cool. We associate warm colors on the color wheel to be your reds, oranges, and yellows. These colors seem to expand and come forward in a drawing. So these are good to use at a higher intensity for objects that are in the foreground of your drawing. If you have warmer objects that are kind of placed in the background, then you may want to consider decreasing the intensity of those objects so those warm colored objects sit back into the distance. Your cooler colors, being purples, blues, and greens, appear to contract and recede in a drawing. So if you have a lot of cool objects that are in the foreground, you may want to accentuate the coolness of those objects by shading in some more warmer colors in your layering to help make those objects stand closer to the foreground. Today, we're going to be taking primary colors and combining them together to create secondary colors. So we're going to be mixing red and yellow to make orange, blue and yellow to make green, and red and blue to make purple. We'll experiment by mixing complementary colors together and then adding white to create various grays. When complementary colors are put together in an equal distribution and then just burnished by pressing really hard on the layers, it actually will create browns, and I'll show you what that looks like in a second. And then we're going to combine primary and secondary colors together to create tertiary colors. So we'll create blue greens, yellow oranges, red violets. Now note that the primary color is always stated first in that. So that's just a good practice with talking about colors, that you always place the primary color first when describing a particular color that you may be seeing in your photograph or your drawing. Begin by making a circle that's 2.5 inches or 3 inches in width. If you don't have a compass, just use some round object like the bottom of a glass or top of a glass to make the circle. We are going to be recreating a color wheel using the 3 primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. Begin with red by shading the top third portion of your circle. Anytime you're shading with colored pencil, you want to create very small circular marks. You're not hatching, you're not cross hatching. It's almost a very more refined version of scumbling. You want to do this because we want to continually be sharpening the pencil as we work. We want the colored pencil to get into the grooves of the paper. That way we're creating a more solid fill. But anytime you begin with coloring with colored pencil, you want to press lightly. Same thing with shading, we gradually build up to the darker values by gradually pressing harder with our colored pencil. So that's what I'm doing here. Where I have just a pure red, that's where I'm going to be gradually building up the pressure of my pencil, and then I'm pressing lighter as I draw away. Now I'm drawing a triangle on the inside of my circle to help me figure out where my yellow should go. You can erase the circle around it, that way the pencil does not mix with the color. Do the same thing that you did with the red, where you're pressing a little bit harder where the yellow is supposed to be, and then gradually lifting up the pressure of your pencil as you begin shading to the right and the left. You will want the yellow to overlap the red. You can see that I did not shade the red far enough, so I'm going to eventually have to go back in here with my red to extend it out, so I'm creating my secondary and tertiary colors. The blue that I want you to use is the one that says violet blue. Even though it's not necessarily a pure blue, it's the closest dark blue that we have. Start this on the bottom left-hand side of the triangle and begin pressing lightly and overlay the blue over top of the yellow. And as you shade to the right and get closer to the yellow, I want you to lift up the pressure of the blue to where it's almost fading out. You can see that on the left-hand side, as I'm shading to the red, I'm also lifting up the pressure of the blue as I get closer to the red so it fans out. Now that I have that blue and yellow extended into my red sections, I can extend my red back over the blue and then my red back over the yellow. This technique of layering colors on top of one another makes colored pencils look very vibrant and more realistic. To create this color wheel, you're going to have to layer these colors on top of one another several times until you get a nice solid fill. As you put every layer down, you want to gradually press a little bit harder for each layer so you're starting to burnish and blend the colors together. Your Prismacolored pencils that you're using are a waxed-based medium. So because they're waxy, that wax is going to blend into one another really well, and it's going to create this beautiful blend. So these Prismacolored pencils are top quality pencils, and quality materials are crucial for rendering successful work. Therefore, do not attempt to blend these Prismacolored pencils with cheaper colored pencils you may have laying around your home. And because these have a wax base, your cheaper colored pencils probably do not. And if you combine cheaper pencils with a wax-based pencil like the Prismacolor, then you're not going to have successful layering. You won't ever be able to put any more layers on top because the cheaper colored pencils kind of create a barrier where blending does no longer occur. And you can see now that I've put in several layers of color that I'm starting to be able to mix and blend the blues and yellows together, almost like we're mixing paint on paper. So as you keep drawing your color wheel, only use your red, yellow, and blue colored pencils. And keep adding in layers of each of these in the order of red, then yellow, then blue, making sure that you're pressing harder near the pure color of the primary color being red, yellow, or blue. And then as you draw away from that pure color, you're lifting up the pressure of your pencil. After you've shaded and built up a nice even layer of color, then I want you to label the primary colors with the colored pencils, red, yellow, and blue. And then I would like you to label the secondary colors. The secondary colors are orange, green, and red. When you label orange, make sure it's directly across from blue because orange is blue's complementary color. When you label green, make sure it's directly across from red. And then when you label purple, make sure it's directly across from yellow. The final set of colors you will have to label are your tertiary. These are when you mix primary and secondary colors together. So for red-orange, that's going to be the area between red and orange. Then you're going to do yellow-orange. Notice how I'm always placing the primary color first. This next one will be yellow-green. Then it will be blue-green, blue-purple, and then red-purple. Next, we're going to be learning how to mix browns and grays with complementary colors. For this first one, lightly take a yellow colored pencil and using that small circular motion, create a nice little strip. Then take your purple colored pencil and very lightly shade over top of it. You're going to want to relayer these colors on top of one another several times until it becomes darker and you don't have a lot of the whites of the paper shown near the end. To create your gray, just take a white colored pencil and shade over the right 1/3 of it. And you can see how it's going to turn it into a gray. You're going to want to do what we've just done, but for every set of complementary main colors. So you want to mix blue and orange together, and then red and green together. Each strip of brown should be built up to create a solid fill, and each of them should have the right third of it colored in with white to show the variations of gray that you can achieve by mixing complementary colors together. The last thing that you're going to do is to create 3 value scales of your primary colors, so red, yellow, and blue. You'll notice for the value of red that the red does not create a really dark value because the red itself is a middle value hue. So to increase the shade of red, you're going to be using blue and green. We use green because green is red's complementary color. We're also using blue because it is one of the cooler colors. Green is also considered a cooler color, so that will help decrease the red's value. You could also use purple if the purple is a darker value than red. But if you notice the purple in your container is already a very similar value to the red hue itself, which is why it's an inappropriate color to use whenever we're trying to make the red darker. Notice how I'm building up my colors in layers. I put the red down first, and then I'm going in with the blue and then the green. I also took my white colored pencil, I started shading on the right hand side of it, and I'm bringing it in towards the left. As I'm shading towards the middle of the value scale, I'm lifting up the pressure as to not make the middle red too much of a tint. So when you're creating this value scale, build it up in layers. Put your red in first. Then you put your next darkest color in, which is going to be your green. Then you put your second darkest color in, which is the blue. You're going to use your white as the 4th color. Have the white start on the right-hand side of this red value scale and lift up the pressure as you shade to the left so you don't make the values too light. You're going to solidify all these colors by going over everything with red, and then you're going to repeat this process several times. So red, green, blue, white, then red, green, blue, white, until you have a finished value scale. When you shade your yellow value scale, use purple to make your darker values. You don't want to use blue because then when you mix blue over yellow, it's going to look green, and then it's going to look like you have a green value scale instead of it yellow. So purple will help reduce the color's intensity while also darkening the hue that we're shading. So press darker or harder on the left-hand side with your purple colored pencil and lift up the pressure of the pencil as you shade to the right. Use the yellow to help solidify all of the colors together so it looks like a more unified yellow value scale. For your third and final value scale, you're going to be using the dark blue. Now you might be looking at your colored pencils and you're like, well, what color pencil do I use to make this darker? Because we have such a limited range of colors, especially if you're at cyber, you're going to be using your black, I know, to create a value scale with the dark blue. This will also give you a sense of maybe a little bit of how black can kind of reduce the vibrancy of a color. But same way that we did with the other two value scales, press a little bit harder on the left-hand side with your black and lift up the pressure of the pencil as you shade to the right. Definitely use the white on this one to help build up your lighter to middle values because that blue is already a really dark value. So you're going to need to use the white to get in those lighter values within that value scale. So today you need to color in a color wheel that has your primary, secondary, and tertiary colors labeled. You need to create 3 browns using the complementary colors and then grays by adding in white on the right 1/3 of each one of those brown lines. Then you need to have value scales for your red, yellow, and blue colored pencil.